All right, I'm not done with the fake news thing yet, though, because this thing has been just sticking in my brow. I can't get over it. So it's pretty obvious to me that over the course of the election, we saw fake news. We saw real fake news constantly being slammed at us. And, you know, from leaks that were going from the Clinton campaign that were run with by CNN and, you know, with the Donna Brazil, all of this stuff that was obviously fake. Then the election happens, but no one said the phrase fake news. Nobody was coming up with that. Then the election happens, and 3 days later, everybody, every outlet, every cable channel, everybody everywhere is running with this idea of fake news.
Not authentic.
Not authentic.
But that synchronized effect.
Yes, so that's what I want to talk about. So tell me about that. What is that?
We don't know.
When suddenly everyone across the board starts doing the same thing.
So this is a skill that we have to get very good at. What conspiracy theorists do that gives them a bad name is that they fill in the details. We don't know what caused this inauthentic thing. We don't know if it was a decision inside of the deep state, if it was the newspapers getting together with the parties and saying we have a credibility crisis, but there was some decision somewhere that mushroomed out as if suddenly fake news had always been the issue.
Suddenly everyone's talking about the exact same thing.
And
we don't know what, or we don't know where it came from, but you think it had to have coordinatedly come from something?
I don't believe that it had an authentic source. I believe that it could mushroom and then people started reacting to it, but I do believe that it was an inauthentic, sudden anomaly. And it wasn't that nobody had brought up fake news. I think if you do a search, you can find fake news as an issue before this. But I believe that what happened is that there was a huge credibility crisis. I don't believe that Donald Trump ever had a 7 or sub 10% chance of being elected. And so this was one of the things that I was talking to Peter about, that I'm a huge fan of this Turkish economist named Timur Kuran, whose theory of preference falsification tries to understand when you're going to get a revolution, when you're not expecting it. And so when you tell everybody, only the only people who support Donald Trump are backward, misogynistic, bigoted, troglodyte KKK members, and who are you voting for, right? So when you do that, of course you're going to skew the polls. Of course nobody wants to admit, because the social cost, the look-ahead function again, is very extreme. So I knew that the election was going to be close, but I don't think anybody could have actually called, it was close. And so that was the best you could do. But the media was wildly off. And even Sam said this thing about, well, I'm going to go back to the polls and the data because what else can you do? Well, there are a very small number of people who are able to do a bit better. And I think that we shouldn't fault ourselves if we weren't among that group. But after the fact, the pressure is to divert attention away from the obvious cheerleading for Hillary Clinton. This was a foregone conclusion. The narrative, and I think narrative-driven news. I had this tweet about the 4 kinds of fake news. So there was narrative-driven, algorithmic, institutional, and false news.
So let's break all those down. So narrative is just, they're all pumping out just this, Hillary's going to win. That's the narrative. And
Hillary is inevitable.
Okay, so that's one version. Now the algorithmic.
Algorithmic means that I no longer have my news in the same form that you do, because we're both getting it off of Twitter, off of Facebook, and those things are pointing us maybe to the traditional articles, but it's being curated and rearranged algorithmically.
Just by how we've clicked in the past and what we've liked and all that. So now we're getting our news literally catered to us.
Right, but how does Facebook figure out, for example, what should go at above the fold, the analog of the first story you see when you log in? Well, usually that's somebody's getting married or the birth of a child. And, Facebook is very good at recognizing what should be in that position.
Sure.
But when it comes to news stories, the key question is, what does their algorithm tell them to put in front of our eyeballs? And so you can fake the world, if you'd like, by de-emphasizing. It's the analog of what would have previously been called burying the lead, so that it's 12 stories deep in your feed when you're already starting to feel a little fatigued and you're just scrolling through.
Right. So wait, let's go to the other two, and then I
Sure.
want to follow up on the algorithm.
So we've got narrative driven news, we've done algorithmic news, and then there's institutional news, where if you happen to be Harvard or the Institute for Advanced Study or the Brookings Institution, you can sort of release what you claim to be objective fact, and you're given this extremely courteous reception.
Right.
And very often that news isn't really news, it's just some construct that somebody's decided that they're going to suppress some findings and accentuate others and filter reality, and then do it from some perspective where it's very difficult to disagree with MIT, on a topic of some technical basis.
Right.
And then you have fake news of the type that all of these other institutions would like us to synonymize
With everything else.
Right. And so that is just somebody's making something up, and it could be in the Kremlin, it could be some teenager yucking it up, coming up with a hoax. But they can't they're not going to be able to keep fake news to just things that don't fact check.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, is that so wherever this started, because as I quote Carl Sagan every week on this show, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So I don't go to the conspiracy part. We don't know where it started.
Right.
So I'm with you on that. But something happened where everyone starts talking about this thing. And what I thought was interesting was how they were pinning so much of it on Breitbart. Now, Breitbart, I don't actually click Breitbart that often. Now and again, someone sends me something or I see it on my Twitter feed. I don't even follow Breitbart. But what I thought really was, what they're upset is that they lost control here. And all Breitbart is doing is the same thing that they've all been doing. Breitbart's just skewing things a little more either to the right or to Trump, really it's not really to the right, it's really to Trumpism, versus what you've all been doing to the left. You've all been doing this for so long, now you see something coming along and getting clicks, and now of course you have to say it's fake. But they weren't even doing anything different.
Well, this is the issue: is you want monopoly power over fake news. And
right.
So what
You're okay with fake news as long as it's the
well,
one
it's our fake news. We're faking it in a fact-checked way.
Yeah.
Well, you're faking it by doing something that we don't know how to control. And I also think it's quite possible that we were being readied for a change in the algorithms. That in essence, Google and Facebook, and again, I'm here speaking just as myself, not as a representative of my company, but I don't know what the relationship is between the intelligence services and these giant tech companies. They obviously have to have a relationship. Now the question is there any agreement that we're going to bury certain kinds of news sources using the algorithms so that you can't actually understand how your world is presented? Is the algorithm open, or is the algorithm effectively, we'll tell you, don't call us, we'll call you?
Right, and I'm pretty sure it's the latter in almost every case. I mean, is there do any of these big companies, as far as you know, have an open algorithm that
We're not there
publicly
yet.
are telling us the changes as they make them?
I think we're not there yet. And I think the idea is that this is a future battle, which is how much are we allowed to know about the algorithms that construct our world for us?
For people that don't get any of this, and even when you say algorithm, I think it confuses people at a certain degree. What is the reason for an algorithm as opposed to just the raw information constantly? Meaning, why does Facebook do it? Is it purely, at the end of the day, because of money for them? You know what I mean? Like they have to give preference to certain things because they need certain things to get clicks. Like, why not just remove the algorithm from the equation? Everyone's got their feeds.
If you remove the algorithm, you're still left with an algorithm. Something has to be first, right? Something has to be at the top of your feed.
Right, but where you just did it by time, let's say.
Okay, so then the idea is, hey, I just had a baby, and you didn't say anything positive. Well, I didn't see it.
Right, so we want an algorithm, I guess, is your point. We need some sort of unifying principle to
And you
this
may
chaos.
have something you can click to say, just give me the time order of the stories by timestamp. But the odds that you're going to use that are going to go down if it doesn't actually match what you want to do. So if there were a high trust environment, which I don't think there is at the moment, you would want your world curated as intelligently as possible for you.
Right.
But of course, how much are you paying for your Facebook subscription?
Well, I only have a fan page.
but no, I don't pay anything.
Right, neither do I, and so
Right.
therefore we are not really the customers of Facebook, where the product has been repeated so many times.
Yeah.
And so why should Facebook care about catering to us? It would be much better to cater to whoever they have to make peace with and get the minimal amount of buy-in. Now, it's not anything against Facebook. It's just, it's a company, it's got a bottom line, and it has to figure out exactly who it's serving in order to remain profitable and to keep growing.
Yeah. So is that part of the problem here, that we expect these social media giants to respect us, but we are not paying them,
Well-
and thus we have a backwards relationship? So you see this all the time. People say, well, Facebook took down my post about this, and usually I find it to be something that I'm for. You know, I see this a lot with ex-Muslim stuff or
Right.
something like that, where they take these posts down. You know, many people who I've had on this show, from Faisal and Melissa Chen and others, and Gad and a few others, have had posts taken down that were doing the right thing, trying to help people, try to empower free speech, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, Facebook is doing whatever it's doing, and you're their bitch,
Well-
pretty much, right?
The question is, where are you going to go? So there's always every year or so, there's a new Facebook competitor, maybe there'll be a new Twitter competitor. So at the moment, none of these alternate efforts have been successful in taking the eyeballs away, because people are mostly not riveted by what you and I are riveted by. They want their world presented to them in a pleasant fashion, and they're not terribly focused on mind control. But
I think that's the quote of the whole episode for sure.
Okay.
Right there. So this is directly related to what you said earlier about that you want your government to, you accept, I think is what you said, that your government is not going to tell you everything.
Right.
But you want it done to you in a sort of mature or sensible way that you can make sense of. But when you take now social media companies and Twitter and all that, and you take the relationships that they have with the government that you just referenced, now we're starting to get into some other stuff, right? Because where is the honesty there? How do we even know who to go to pilfer some honesty out of that?
Well, I think that this has to do with, are you getting a fiction that befits your level of sophistication? So, the princess cannot necessarily feel the pea when something is wrong. Maybe it's a pea, maybe it's a golf ball, maybe it's a watermelon. So she doesn't usually have that kind of acuity, but many of us can tell something is wrong in my news. This story is not being reported the way I would expect. I'm not seeing, let's take Twitter.
Yeah.
Milo did some stuff that I wasn't thrilled with, but I was getting death threats, on Twitter, and Twitter wasn't terribly worried about, really sick stuff.
Right.
So
you're not defending the specifics of what Milo may or may
all
not
I
have
know,
done.
all I know is that something is bananas
Yeah.
about singling out somebody. Milo's playing a half intellectual, half troll chimeric game, and I don't know why he and his ilk choose to do that. There's a part of this movement which says that free speech is best advanced by being outrageous and offensive. And there's a different wing of it, which I think I relate much more to, which says free speech, there's so many controversial things that need to be said and discussed. Why would you pick, trolling somebody about their weight or, or their attractiveness? Just, I don't get that. Now, with that said, I'm trying to back out, well, what is Twitter really worried about? I don't think it's safety. There's a lot of unsafe stuff that they won't clean up.
So then what is it?
Well, I don't know. And then this is the point, which is that I hope what we're going to learn is how to make less extraordinary claims, right? I know something is wrong. I don't know what exactly is wrong. I know enough to say this is unnatural. I don't know enough to say, well, the problem is that Jack had a meeting at the NSA and they read him the Riot Act. That's where you get into territory that I'm just not comfortable with, because I don't know.
Yeah. Knowing is kind of important, but it seems lost these days.
Assume that you can know about an abstraction, but you can't know about the specifics. And I think this is a place where computer scientists and mathematicians feel very comfortable, which is that very often we deal with an abstraction that can't be constructed. And so I know that there's a problem. I don't know what the nature of the problem is, just the way I know that fake news came out too quickly, too unified. And, you know, Jon Stewart used to do this. I remember a particular moment where he went and took video from each of the Sunday morning talk shows, and there were like 10 Republicans, and each of them used the phrase, I think he's running away from the top of the ticket. He seems to be running away from the top of the ticket. He might be running away from the top of the ticket.
Yeah.
And when you hear the same weird phrase
Yeah.
10 times out of 10 mouths, you don't need to know exactly that there was a talking points memo, that it came out from this email address, was broadcast to these people, and that they fanned out and then used perseveration by just repeating and repeating to make something as if true. But it's enough to know something is artificial. So I think it's really important that we all get very good at saying, I can tell that this is artificial and I don't know what caused it.
So basically what you're saying is we're in the matrix here, and a few of us are kind of starting to see a little bit of the code shaking out, because it's kind of, it got fat on itself, I guess.
We were watching a magic performance that has been performed every 4 years since 1980 at least, which is when I sort of have my first adult memories of politics. And suddenly somebody threw on the lights. And we see trapdoors, and we see wires, and we see false bottoms of boxes, and everybody's looking at this saying, you're kidding me, right? So with the lights off, it was a believable show for many people. Now, some of us who had slightly, you know, better night vision were looking at the wires in the dark. But now I feel like I've mostly lost whatever special edge I had.
That's scary, I suppose.
No, it's actually, it's wonderful. I've never had so many people to talk to about the obvious inauthenticity of what are considered to be the pillars, you know, in particular of the Fourth Estate.
Yeah. Is that the irony, is that we have to use all of these things? This very show is on YouTube. There's an algorithm involved.
Well, we may be demonetized.
We could be. I mean, look, I've said, you know, this YouTube does this demonetization thing. They demonetized all of the videos that I did with John McCain. John McCain, who is a senator, who is on every cable news show every week, so the networks deem him worthy of monetization. Right. YouTube decided to demonetize that. YouTube demonetized our videos with Douglas Murray.
I think it's inauthentic.
It's inauthentic, and it shows political bias, because there's certain topics that they don't want you to be talking about.
That's what they say. I don't know. It's possible that's really what they're doing, and it's possible that it's something else. And again, it's the same basic pattern. Don't speculate to the point where you're making an extraordinary claim with requiring proof that you don't have. But I would not, let's put it this way. It is not inconsistent with the weirdness of demonetization, in particular your situation with John McCain, let's say, that it's not really about advertisers and offensive material. That's the fig leaf, and
there's
something other, you know, so the princess feels an X, solve for X.
Yeah, for the record, we did contact them after the McCain thing, and they did remonetize our videos. So that, to me, shows either a fault in the algorithm or a fault in...
Where they're driving your costs, where the idea is that you can't afford to do that repeatedly with every single video.
Yeah, right, because we can't put the manpower in
we don't know.
To check that. Well, what do you think about that also, that there's a level of censorship that's a newer level, I think, which isn't that you can't say these things, because there's virtually nothing that right now we can't say. I certainly would let you say whatever you want to say, and people know my policy. I let my guests hang themselves, so feel free.
Is that what I'm doing?
Maybe you've done it already and you don't even know.
Right.
But that the new level of censorship is actually that they're showing us ways to silence ourselves. So they'll say, all right, if you talk about ISIS or radical Islam or whatever, we're going to not monetize it. They're not censoring you, but you're going to self-censor if you have to make a living doing it. That's one of the reasons why we're on Patreon. I'm beholden to people of a gajillion different political views and not just to the algorithm. If I was beholden to the algorithm, maybe I would have to do things a little bit differently. Or in the case of Twitter, it's like, well, we got rid of Milo because of hate or whatever they eventually said, but they verified Richard Spencer, who's the white supremacist leader of the alt-right, and they verified the Muslim Brotherhood, whose stated goal is worldwide jihad, basically. So there's some odd thing that none of us can grasp here.
Right, and I'm just going one extra step beyond that, which is I think a lot of this is some kind of decision-making that is not adult level fiction. I believe that I think you've said it beautifully. Censorship, if it has to be done with the heavy hand of the state or through the fascia that binds media to universities to government, is going to be very inefficient relative to self-censorship. So the key thing that has been relied upon is that you are always looking at self-neutralization. You're going to take yourself off the chessboard if you attempt to lead an authentic life, if you attempt to observe things that you're supposed to not be observing. And as long as you're willing to not have an income and be called every dirty name in the book,
Right.
and put your personal relationships at risk, of course, it's a free country.
Yeah.
What's exciting is the idea that many of us are saying, yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to carry, I'm just looking at my watch. This is a losing game for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all of us, you're going to call us all out as being creeps and weirdos and conspiracy theorists and nutcases. Well, there's nothing remotely nutty about this conversation.
Yeah, well, that's the irony, and I said this in the direct message at the top of the show, is like now what a lot of these people have done is painted themselves into a corner, because if your rationale is that everyone who disagrees with you is a bigot or a racist or some other sort of weirdo or blah, 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 well, if they start doing good things, how can you say that a racist or a bigot is now doing good things? So you have to then either turn to violence or some other nefarious thing, because you can't. If you've called Trump Hitler for 2 years and then things start getting better under Trump, well, now you're in a real intellectual box that is of your own doing.
This is what's so exciting.
So this is what Scott Adams was talking about. Yeah. Is that what you would say, that when he kept talking about, well, the opportunity that will present itself after this?
And I think that's where the focal point of a Peter Thiel or a Scott Adams or a Donald Trump was, which is, or another name, which there's nobody I get more flack for than saying anything positive about Mike Cernovich for me. Mm-hmm. And I talked to Mike because he is a new phenomenon. So whether you like him or you hate him, to ignore him is to mispredict the election, right? Because he was on to something about what has changed.
And I've said that publicly many times.
No,
I had him on the show, which was...
And I find a lot of stuff that he's done troubling, and he's very respectful. He says, I understand that this isn't your cup of tea and you wouldn't carry this out. But, I don't believe for a minute that he ever expected to really play with the alt-right past the election, right? And so he's, you're starting to see him say, okay, that was then, this is now. Trump is doing the same thing. Lock her up, don't worry about it. Yeah. A lot of these people had a focal point that was past the election, it was non-literal, and it was a question of how do we put together some crazy coalition that does not naturally exist in the minds of a consultant, so that we can win, and then once we've won, then we'll settle out all of these problems. And so that was a kind of a buried feature of the terrain. So you had all of these people who said, this is just disingenuous. We're trying to win here. We're trying to get a clean slate, and that's what Trump got.
So in a way, the Cernoviches of the world, and maybe the Milos to a certain extent, and the Trumps, they used the white supremacists. I don't believe that there are a lot of them, actually, certainly not that have any institutional power. But my suspicion all along was that Trump was just using whatever the wink he was giving to that group was just a use to get power, and now I don't think he's going to be throwing any favors to the white supremacists.
Well, yeah, I go into a little bit more dangerous territory. So, as a Jewish American, I don't relate to the European Christian identity. However, I think it's absolutely fascinating that you have this identity politics game, which every group can play, with the exception of Christians of European descent, particularly male, and if they're doing well. Yeah. And then if that group tries to have an identity,
now they're evil.
They're white nationalists.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're white, that's one thing. If you're a nationalist, that's okay too. But if you're both white and nationalist, you're the living embodiment of evil. And so this deranged the conversation. We could not actually talk through it because, in particular, the left was very focused on the idea that identity politics is compensatory for the wrongdoings of one particular group. And then there was this like ordering, as you say, about the Victim Olympics.
Yeah, the Oppression Olympics.
The Oppression Olympics. And that is part of our problem, which is I'm not particularly threatened by somebody who says I come from a European tradition. I'm proud of the Enlightenment. I feel great burden for wrong things that we did during the colonial era, but this is who I am. And if that person wants to hear Merry Christmas, and if that person wants to hear all of the positive things done by Christians of European descent, I think it's dangerous and stupid to keep poking this tiger in the eye, saying bigot, racist, whatever. What do you think it's going to do?
Yeah.
Is it just going to sit there infinitely? No.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree, and that's why I heard, when Cernovich was first starting, I thought, I don't know exactly what he's saying. Some of it seems kind of nuts, but this is someone that's relevant, so let me talk to him. And then I talked to Milo and I talked to Scott Adams, and I thought they were all addressing this group of people.
Right.
And now, look, now Trump's in power. So now when January 20th rolls around, and people are rightly mocking the Trump administration when they're fighting the power, will these guys be so, against political correctness? We shall see.
Well, I guess what my take on it is that I think Trump had a brilliant idea about how to put together a demographic that could win. And if you think about it, it's a little, demography, whether it was Lee Atwater or Karl Rove, who found, the exurb, and nobody knew that there was something between rural and suburban that you could actually play to. So Trump found something that was the analog of the exurb. And now the thing is, okay, how do I swap out the least pleasant parts of that demographic and replace it with people who are newly converted, who say, I was worried that there was going to be a Holocaust, and now I see that this is actually potentially Israel's greatest supporter.
Yeah.
Or whether that's evangelicals or the small but powerful Jewish groups.
Yeah.
Right? So as Trump starts to accumulate some wins or some losses, he will find out whether he can afford to replace the least savory parts of the coalition.
Yeah.
And Hillary wasn't right, I think, about half, being deplorables. That was an idiotic statement on her part. But there was some tiny portion of out-and-out deplorables who thought that they'd found their savior in Donald Trump. I think it's probably going to be a very rude awakening.
Yeah. My thing with Trump all along was I kept saying, I don't know what his moral center is. I get the troll game. I get he saw this new coalition, all of that stuff. How do you view his moral center? Do you have a sense, and does that scare you if you don't know what it is?
Well, so
to the extent that I don't know how much we know about any of these.
No, absolutely. Actually. So if you go back to why I was so angry at Hillary throughout the campaign, but still voting for her, and I said very little that was really against Trump. The issue was just that Trump's variance, the possible things he will be able to do. This is a guy who is quite likely to be a mixture of the best and worst president we've ever had, right? And so it's not that he's just bad or that, because he is disingenuous and he's playing this next level game with persuasion. But the problem is that the variance is so large and the tolerances are so small that that's what's terrifying to me. It's just, I have no idea what this guy's going to do. He's kept his cards very close to his chest. By the way, family-run businesses can keep secrets about how to do business that if you're a public company, it's effectively impossible or illegal to do. And so I believe that one thing that's happened is that a lot of the world's most powerful knowledge is held by groups that are traditionally very insular. And we have this idea that the world's knowledge is available, but I think that actually a lot of very subtle voodoo is held closely, either by family businesses or the Parsis in India or Orthodox Jews. So these very insular clans, including organized crime, have some knowledge about how the world works that can't be shared in public. And I think that Trump shows all evidence of being a family business kind of a guy, and they've kept certain truths and certain moves, and some of those may be ethical, some of them may be sub-ethical, I don't know. But you're looking at a new kind of object. And the number of people who haven't updated to say, this is no clown, this is no fool, this is no idiot, this is a next level player, pay attention.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I keep seeing people say the same, oh, he's an idiot. He just says whatever he thinks. It's like, you'd have to be insane, actually, to really think that's what's going on here at this point.
Well, this is the thing I always deal with Peter, where, one of our most frequent conversations is this thing in the office a bug or a feature? And you think it's just a bug, we're doing something wrong, we should institute a meeting or a policy. It turns out that a lot of the things around the office are features, not bugs. And I often liken Trump to intellectual drunken boxing. You've got some guy who's kind of bobbing and weaving, and he should be really easy to hit, and then suddenly you've got a boot on your thorax, and you're thinking, oh, he got lucky.
Yeah.
Well, how many times do you want to play?
Right, how many times in a row?
I don't like losing.